Okay, so we often hear political narratives, but what if there's a hidden layer, something deeper going on, especially around major events like an election?
That's exactly the kind of question raised by this new book we're looking into today. Its original sin, President Biden's decline, its cover-up, and his disastrous choice to run again.
Right, by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. Tapper from CNN, Thompson from Axios, both pretty well-known journalists.
Absolutely. And the book reportedly leans on quite extensive sourcing. They mentioned over 200 interviews focusing on President Biden, his condition, and the run-up to the 2024 election.
So our mission today is basically to unpack the main claims from Original Sin. What are Tapper and Thompson really arguing about President Biden's health and how it supposedly impacted that election?
Well, the central claim is pretty explosive. They allege there was a deliberate, coordinated effort. They call it a plot to cover up what they describe as President Biden's physical and mental decline.
A plot to cover up. That's strong language.
It is. And they take it a step further. They argue this alleged cover-up wasn't just, problematic in itself, but that it directly contributed to what they call a 2024 election disaster for the Democrats.
A disaster directly linked to concealing his condition.
That's the core thesis, yes. And coming from journalists like Tapper and Thompson, with that claimed number of sources, it carries a certain weight.
Over 200 interviews. That suggests they talked to a lot of different people.
It does. And they include quotes that seem to reflect serious concern from within. There's one from a senior administration official apparently blaming Biden's inner circle and even Biden's own hubris for not stepping aside.
So not just critics, then.
Apparently not. The book states they spoke to both supporters and critics. But the implication is that even some people who were sympathetic, who wanted him to succeed, observed this decline.
And what about evidence for this alleged cover-up? Did they offer specifics?
They talk about compelling evidence. We don't have every detail laid out here, of course, but one thing that jumps out is this reported unforgettable eyewitness description.
Which one is that?
The one comparing President Biden to Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. The
Right.
frail, elderly character. It's a really vivid comparison.
Wow. Yeah, that certainly paints a picture. An unsettling one.
It does. And it leads into another point. The book raises this question about, well, who is actually running the country after, say, 4:30 p.m.?
Meaning his workday ended early.
That's the suggestion in the book,
Yeah.
that his effective workday was limited, raising questions about his capacity throughout the entire day.
Which then ties into that other claim, right, about who was really in charge.
Exactly. The claim that 5 people were running the country and Biden was maybe more like a senior member of the board.
And they compare that to Woodrow Wilson when he was incapacitated.
Yes, drawing that historical parallel really underlines the seriousness of what they're alleging about delegation and, well, who held the actual power.
So when did this alleged decline begin? According to the book, do they pinpoint a moment?
They explore that. One potential inflection point they highlight is the death of his son, Beau Biden, back in 2014.
Ah, yes. That was obviously a huge personal tragedy for him.
Immense. And the book includes a really quite poignant quote from a senior White House official saying Biden was 100% sharper before Beau died, that Beau's death wrecked him, and part of him died that never came back.
That adds a very human but also concerning dimension.
It does. And the book suggests that even by the 2020 convention, some observers were seeing signs. There's an anecdote about a Democrat comparing watching Biden videos to seeing a grandpa who shouldn't be driving.
Kind of a blunt analogy.
Very blunt. But the authors seem to suggest the really pronounced and inescapable physical signs emerged later, maybe around 2022 or 2023.
Such as?
Things like the shuffling gait became more noticeable, apparently. And there are descriptions cited of him being confused and forgetful more often.
Were there other contributing factors mentioned beyond age or Beau's death?
Yes. The book definitely touches on the immense stress related to his son, Hunter Biden's legal troubles and, well, his scandal-ridden life.
That must have taken a toll.
You'd have to assume so. One cabinet secretary is quoted describing the gun trial as like a 500-pound weight dropped on the president's head.
It's complex, though, isn't it? Because that history of loss also fed into his image.
Absolutely. The book acknowledges that. His personal tragedies, while deeply painful, were part of what made him seem empathetic to many voters, someone who understood loss.
Then comes the 2024 debate. The book seems to frame this as a major turning point, publicly at least.
Definitely. It's portrayed as the moment the dam broke, so to speak, when the concerns about his condition became undeniable for a huge audience.
What kind of descriptions do they use?
They're quite stark. One Democratic operative apparently said it was like watching someone die.
Oof, that's brutal.
It is. And Tapper himself, as a moderator, reportedly felt the performance was even worse in person than it looked on TV.
And wasn't there that detail about the note passed between moderators?
Yes. Apparently, Dana Bash passed Tapper a note right after Biden's beat Medicare comment. The note just said, he just lost the election.
Wow, just like that. Shows the immediate impact they felt it had.
It really does. And it raises questions about how people who did raise concerns earlier were treated. The book touches on that, too.
Like Congressman Dean Phillips.
Right. Phillips challenged Biden in the primaries, raising fitness issues. The book says he was essentially shut out and shunned by parts of the party establishment.
And special counsel Robert Hur as well.
Yes, Hur investigated the classified documents issue. He didn't recommend charges, but his report described Biden as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
And that description caused a huge backlash, didn't it?
It did. Intense criticism, even though, that's the kind of assessment a special counsel might make based on interviews. It highlights the sensitivity around the issue.
So how does Donald Trump fit into this narrative, according to the book?
Well, the authors argue Trump was a massive factor, but perhaps not in the way you'd first think. It wasn't just about the direct political contest.
How so?
They talk about the intense negative partisanship, the fear and resentment surrounding Trump and the Mad Jane movement, this toxic speedball, as they call it.
And the argument is that this fear justified.
What? It fostered a kind of ends justify the means thinking among some Democrats and Biden allies, according to the book. The idea being that stopping Trump was so paramount, it justified concealing the full extent of Biden's alleged condition.
So the threat of Trump became the rationale for the lack of transparency.
That's the argument presented, that Team Biden adopted a playbook of deny, deflect, and attack whenever questions about his health came up, essentially asking the public to ignore their own eyes and ears.
And then there was the timing of the cancer diagnosis announcement.
Right. The book mentions Biden's previously undisclosed stage 5E cancer diagnosis being announced just the day before Original Sin was released. The authors suggest this adds another layer of questions about transparency and timing.
What about Biden's own motivations for running again? Does the book explore that?
It does. It floats the idea that maybe he genuinely convinced himself that only he could beat Trump. That sense of unique responsibility.
Even though he'd initially positioned himself as a bridge president.
Exactly. The book notes that running again seemed to contradict that earlier pledge to bridge the gap to the next generation of leaders.
And there's that Jerry Brown quote in there, too?
Yeah, the former California governor comparing politics to psychic cocaine. A pretty cynical take, but perhaps reflecting on the allure of staying in power.
So putting it all together, how do Tapper and Thompson frame this whole episode? What's their final take?
They seem to position the book as a first draft of history on this chapter of Biden's presidency and legacy. They do give credit for considerable legislative achievements.
There sounds like a but coming.
There is. The overall tone regarding this final period is quite critical. They characterize this last chapter as brutal, unfortunate, and entirely preventable.
Preventable if. If what? If he hadn't run, or if there'd been more transparency.
The implication seems to be both. That the decision to run, combined with the alleged efforts to obscure his condition, led to this outcome they describe as a preventable disaster.
So just to recap our deep dive into Original Sin, the book lays out these really serious claims about a deliberate cover-up of President Biden's health decline, uses reported insider accounts, and links this directly to the Democrats' 2024 election results.
Exactly. It pieces together a narrative, based on their reporting, suggesting significant consequences stemmed from decisions made about his health and candidacy. Again, it's crucial we emphasize these are the claims and perspectives presented in the book.
It definitely leaves you thinking, and it raises a fundamental question, really, for you listening. When it comes to the presidency, arguably the most demanding job in the world, what's the right balance? How much transparency about a candidate's health do we, as voters, need and deserve? It's certainly something to